Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Resilient. Highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Better Humanology Podcast. Jared Moon here. Today we have Dr. Michael Gervais. And I'm going to give a little bit longer introduction on Dr. Gervais this time because we don't do a huge intro once we get into the podcast and we start talking because the conversation goes where it goes. And we talk about a lot of different things. Just on the first two challenges and book recommendation, he has so much profound information that he shares. It just didn't seem appropriate to move into this long introduction. So I'm going to do it now where you know how impressive Dr. Gervais is and why he's on the podcast, and the content speaks for itself, but let me give you a little background on who he is. So, Dr. Michael Gervais is a high-performance psychologist who has worked directly with Olympic gold medalists, world record setters, and the Super Bowl winning Seattle Seahawks, where he helped integrate meditation and mindfulness techniques. He is also the co-founder of Compete to Create, alongside Coach Pete Carroll, whose mission is to help people become the best they can be. He's a published author in peer-reviewed journals and recognized speaker on optimal human performance. Michael has been featured by media worldwide and is the host of the Finding Mastery podcast, where he interviews world-class performers and deconstructs paths to mastery. So he has a lot of experience, has worked with really high-level human beings in almost every field and endeavor. So again, get out your pens, get out your notebooks, take some notes. Here is Dr. Michael Gervais. All right, Dr. Gervais, I'm super glad to have you on the Better Humanology podcast. Been waiting on this one for a while. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for spending the time to create the space to have this conversation, and I'm looking forward to it as well. So thanks, Jared.
All right, so we get started with challenges to get our listeners primed for their week and ready to go. So I'm going to hand that to you right here at the start, if you don't mind. Can you start us off with a fitness challenge?
Yes. And let's talk about the concept first. So the concept that I've learned is to be able to do two things really well. One is manage stress, physiological, emotional, mental stress really well, and then to be able to recover from that stress on a regular basis. So the recommendation of the challenge is run to the edge of your capabilities and capacity on a daily basis and recover in a world-class way. So how do you run to the edge? There's two ways to do that. One is put yourself in very difficult environments and difficult scenarios, either physically, which is easier than the second one, which is emotionally. So run to the edge of your capacity. And if you're only running to the edge of your capacity physically and not doing the emotional, you'll find a weak link in the chain as soon as there's some sort of pressure in the environment or internal experience. So run to the edge both on a daily basis and then recover in a world-class way. There's 4 ways to recover as a general rule. And before I get into the mechanics of it, I'll start by saying that on the world stage of athletics and sport, we talk about recovery more than we talk about working hard. 90% of people on the world stage have to work hard. The other 10% are these genetic freaks that, they eat whatever, they don't train like you think they train, and they're the best on the field or best in the court. So, but the majority of people are all working really, really hard. And so we have to talk about recovery a lot. And the 4 mechanical parts of recovery are pretty simple. Sleep, like your life depended on it. The quality of your life certainly does. So sleep well, eat and hydrate well, as you would recognize, move well, meaning do it intentionally, do it purposefully, do it specifically, do it often, and do it in a cadence of intensity where on a weekly basis you're figuring out the right intensity levels, including load as well. And then the 4th pillar is to think well. And without that proper level of quality thinking, we end up burning through our natural resources that we've stored up through sleep, eat, and hydration. And by 10 a.m., if we're thinking in frustrated, anxious-based ways, it's just like we're losing through holes in the bottom of our reservoir all the important and necessary energy. So like that's the way that we think about getting better. Getting those two systems in place and doing it in quote unquote a world-class way.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for the breakdown. That was perfect. All right. How about a mental toughness challenge? I'm very interested to see what your take is on a mental toughness challenge.
Well, let's first talk about what mental toughness is. Is that cool?
Yes. I love having this conversation.
Okay, good. So I'd say the old thought, which is not a wrong thought, but maybe not complete. The old thought was an image of somebody that's going to, I don't know, bang their head against the wall until the wall cracks, like being tough in that way. And it's not that that's wrong. It's just that that's not the only way to think about mental toughness. Mental toughness is multivariate. It is complicated, and there's no clearly one accepted definition of mental toughness in the field of sports psychology. So there's layers and textures and many points of view about how to build this experience, an internal experience where people have resolve. They understand how to be able to do difficult things for an extended period of time. So if we go right underneath the surface of mental toughness, there's a combination of having great strength, mental strength. So we need to talk about that. And then we also need to talk about being nimble and resilient and being able to adjust eloquently to the unfolding and unpredictable unknown. And so it's a combination between strength and flexibility. Just like most things that are special, they have that right balance between the two. And so once we dive down into, if we could oversimplify the not well understood concept of mental toughness and put it in those two buckets of strength and resiliency, or strength and nimbleness, the resiliency piece is really important. And the only way to build resiliency is by going through difficult things. Like that's the only way to build the capacity, is the same way that you build like tough steel or weaponry, is that it has to be forged in fire. And that's how we earn resiliency. And so the way we earn it is by running to the edge, like we talked about earlier, being in the middle, in the arena of uncomfortable and difficult scenarios, and then following these 3 C's, if you will. And this is some evidence and research around hardiness, and it's the having commitment to the challenge. So those are the 2 C's: staying committed, loving the challenge, and then controlling what's in your control. And those are some of the basic building blocks for resiliency, along with emotional awareness and along with the skill to harness and guide our emotions. Notice that we're not talking about controlling emotions. We're talking about awareness of emotions and then harnessing and guiding them. So that's some of the stuff of resiliency. And then if you want to dive down and have like a very concrete thing to do to build mental toughness, it would certainly be any experience that helps somebody emotionally be vulnerable. And now that might sound counterintuitive to the environments I work with our alpha competitors, the 0.5% in the world, that their capacity to understand the right way to be vulnerable is extraordinary for many of them. And that vulnerability is about standing in a space where you don't have all of the answers, and you know that you don't have all of the answers, and you're at the same time being tested for the answer. And if you can be open enough to say, I don't know, and have the courage to put yourself in that situation, to figure it out on the fly based on your preparation, that is that is absolutely a very difficult experience for people to do. And it's extraordinary as a progression to growth. Now, for me to be even more concrete, one level below that is one of the training methodologies that we create for that is say something kind to somebody. Do something where you're saying something intimate, or you're saying something in a vulnerable way to either a loved one or a stranger. And it's that act of saying the thing that's difficult to say that requires a person to be completely open, exposed for ridicule, dismissiveness, or, acceptance. And so that's a great way. It's a very difficult thing for many people to do, especially the alpha competitors, is to say and be emotionally available the difficult things that are difficult to say. And so I hope that that's concrete enough. And you can go like the mechanics of how to do that. You can set up a schedule to do it. Like every day I'm going to say 3 things, whatever. And you can do it with people you don't know, people you do know. And the idea is to be vulnerable.
I really appreciate that answer, going from that bird's eye view all the way down to concrete things that you could do. So getting, just to summarize that last portion, so getting comfortable in a vulnerable state is in your opinion a great way to build mental toughness. Now the vulnerability you believe should be more on an emotional level, is what you're saying.
Yeah, the physical part is easy, right? Like it's okay. I want to be sensitive. It's hard to be physically uncomfortable. But you know what happens in 30 seconds? That physical relief goes away for most people. Like think about if you're at a VO2 max or, you're whatever, like you're at the edge of a rep or a set or, like it goes away in 30 seconds, like, or 2 minutes or whatever. Like you get your heart rate and your system back in place where you're not gasping for air as much. So physically is important because you learn something about your mind when you're at the edge or right near the edge of physical exhaustion or high intensity. And so the most important mental, strike that, let me not say the most important, one of the very important components to figuring out your inner dialogue is getting to the edge of the cliff. And you can do that physically. You could do that literally by standing on the edge of a cliff. That's dangerous. People fall and slip, so there's consequences there. And you can also do it in training, if you're in a sport or whatever. And then you can also do it emotionally. And it's that emotional one that is not unearthed often enough for most humans. And it's waiting there always, every day. There's opportunities to say tender, difficult things where you could be exposed, to speak truthfully, as opposed let me say that more clearly, to speak truthfully rather than to say what is popular or to say what is expected of you. Sometimes we fall in traps in our relationships where we become the person that we're comfortable being around somebody else. And what does that mean? That means you might be the same person that you were with your knucklehead friends from high school, that you were with them way back then, because that was the role that you took. But actually now you're very different. You've grown in lots of ways, and to have the strength and the vulnerability to speak authentically is really hard. It's a very hard thing to do. So I don't think it gets easier to be uncomfortable. Like that phrase, get comfortable being uncomfortable. I don't think that works. I don't think that's right. But accepting the importance of being vulnerable and being at the edge of capacity, the edge of instability, accepting that is necessary and required, and also creates an incredible cost to a person's internal resources. That's why we need the recovery piece. Accepting that is a necessary component and there's a high demand when doing it, I think is fundamentally important. And then the last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop on this piece, is that what I've learned from half percenters of the world is that we should not put them on a pedestal for what they do. What they do is beautiful and extraordinary and difficult and more complicated than most people would ever recognize. But what we ought to herald them for is the fact that they fundamentally organize their life to grow, for feedback on what they're doing well and not doing well, and on strategies to get better. They fundamentally organize their life to get better, which means that they have to be open to coaching, criticism. They have to be open to failure, open to mistakes. And none of that's easy. It's just not easy. Yeah. So it's a fundamental organization. Most people, they want to, okay, I don't know if I'm going to be too aggressive with you, Jared, here. There's no secrets. There's no hacks. There's no 7 steps to whatever. There is a fundamental commitment to a particular way of living. And I can give better handles to that if you want, but there's no shortcuts to any of this.
Yeah, and I was just, having a conversation about this the other day with a world-class coach, and he said something similar of it's not even a secret, but the only real secret if you had one, and that's not what I'm after by any stretch. He just said little and often over the long haul, and that's what adds up to building mental toughness and building yourself over time. There's no the people who are really successful have put in the reps, for lack of a better word, in almost every aspect of their life. And I think you articulated that so well just on mental toughness. I want to foot stomp that for everybody listening, because my opinion of mental toughness, I've been asking this question for 2 years to a very wide range of guests on the show. And yeah, I think physical fitness is, like you were kind of saying, is just the tip of the iceberg, because you can throttle back, or the pain's over quickly. Tip of the iceberg when it comes to mental toughness. What's under the surface is really what you just said. And like I said, I haven't heard someone articulate it so well, to the fact that being vulnerable in these emotional states, that is the iceberg under the surface. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, one way that we'll see it is pick a sport, right? Let's do football, because we're in season right now and it's timely. Is that there are people that are football tough. Okay, they can be physically tough, but physical tough means durability, right? They can withstand a hit. Okay, that's good. Physical toughness is good. Football tough is they can do the difficult thing on the gridiron. They can do the difficult thing in the weight room. They can do the difficult thing in practice. They can do the difficult thing to make choices to fuel their body and their mind. But then human tough is a whole different thing, right? Like being able to step in front of a moving bus to save your child, to be able to stand up for somebody who's being ridiculed, to have the conviction to say no more, this is wrong, and I'm not going to be part of this, whatever this is anymore. And I'm thinking Rosa Parks, I'm thinking Helen Keller, I'm thinking Nelson Mandela, I'm thinking extraordinary people. That requires not emotional. And by the way, there's no such thing as mental toughness, really. It's emotional, right? So when we say mental toughness, it's the discipline to have a thought, but it's really an emotional capacity that we need to get better at, to have this thing called mental toughness. Mental toughness, is being able to stay focused. That's not really it. That's important. That's important. That's part of it. But human toughness really captures the essence of it.
All right, now moving to the next question. How about a book recommendation?
I love reading, and I want to put an asterisk next to whatever I'm about to say. I've got lots of books that I can definitely recommend to you, but whatever I'm about to say, it's important, I think, for people to check in to why read more. And acquiring knowledge is wonderful and important. And maybe the best recommendation instead of a book recommendation is to listen to the wisdom within. And so the best recommendation I can give for people to grow is to listen, to spend the time to get to the signal that's within. And that journey is extraordinary. It is hard and it is rare. And so I want to put that asterisk next to what I'm about to recommend from, consumption model. And the consumption of outside information, like a foundation one for me, is Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And it's not just for men, it's for, all people. And the first half of that book has been a game changer. And I think I was exposed to it 25, 30 years ago. And it was like lightning bolts all over the reading of that text. And so I'd recommend the first half of that book to everyone.
It really is a phenomenal book, and I appreciate the recommendation. Now, going back to that first part, the asterisk before the book recommendation, how do you recommend, because the question is looming there, how do you recommend someone listen within? Is this something tactical, or is it a journey that people have to take on over the course of a lifetime? Meditation? How does one harness that?
There are three ways that I know best to do that, and this is increasing the sensitivity of your ability to be aware of what's happening within and outside of you, right? And so there's three ways that are accelerants to increasing that sensitivity. Because without sensitivity, you're just a rude, crude tool, right? Like, it's just like a china and a bowl in a china shop. And high performance is about being highly sensitive, highly attuned to adjust quickly and accurately. And that doesn't mean fragile. It actually means, we've learned the phrase anti-fragile. It means really strong, that you can adjust quickly and accurately in rugged and hostile environments. How? How do we do that? There's three, and the last one, I'll leave what I think is the more popular and but maybe more robust strategy to the end. The first is being around wise people. If you don't know a wise person, man or woman, I would highly recommend finding wise people to be around. And they might not want to be around you. Okay, so it doesn't mean just because they're wise that you have the right to be around them. It's like figuring out the right ways to find and listen to people that have truly understood the essence of what is real and what is true. And that's the path of insight and wisdom. And there's the old Zen parable, not wives' tale, the old Zen parable, that there's three types of people. There's three types of paths. The path of the old fool who chased money and fame and recognition and security. Then there's the path of the bitter old fool. They chased all of those things and it didn't work out well for them, so they're bitter and pissed. And then there's the path of the wise person. So the wise man and the wise woman are working to understand truth, right? Just get to the bottom of it. And so the first is be around wise people if you can. The second is, and so when you're listening, listen to them, right? Like listen, feel. The second part of that listening is when you say things, like listen to the way and feel the way it sounds and feels when you say things. Like listen to yourself in those moments of communication and listening. The second strategy, though, is to write. And I don't know. I mean, it's been around since we figured out how to actually scribe our thoughts, and it's powerful. And in today's modern, insta-paced, fast world or whatever, it's really hard to spend the time to be disciplined enough to be organized with our thoughts. And most people that I know don't have a philosophy that guides them. Having a philosophy is an incredible accelerant to being a powerful human and a high performer for sure. But so that process of writing to search and understand and be able to clearly articulate your guiding principles, your philosophy, and to be able to do that in 25 words or less, or 10 words or less, or 2 words or less, to be able to do that with great clarity provides the foundation for people to know how to live with some conviction. So I'd say that's the second, writing. And then the third is mindfulness. And, you can call it meditation. The word meditation, I've been practicing for, I think it's like 19 to 20 years, somewhere in that range. And the sensitivity that I have to the word of meditation, there's one is there's some baggage with the word. There's some sort of images that gets conjured about a hippy dippy ooey gooey way of living. And so using the word mindfulness helps to sharpen that razor's edge just a little bit, because you can add the word training behind it. Mindfulness training is meditation. So mindfulness work is a listening. It's a deep focus skill, and it's a paying attention to the present moment without judgment. And it's a returning to the present moment 1,000 times to hopefully be able to get to the truth of what is happening in any moment. So mindfulness training and meditation is a concentration attention training first and foremost to increase our awareness of 4 things. And those 4 things are increased awareness of our thoughts, our emotions, our body sensations, and the unfolding world around us. And if we're more aware, we increase our ability to be more sensitive. And not sensitive like, oh, he's going to fall apart or she's going to fall apart. She's too or he's too sensitive. Not that at all. Sensitivity in the, as in a Formula One sensitivity, like a precision sensitivity. And then if you can spend more time in the present moment, you get to the second most powerful arc of mindfulness work is the awareness leads to time in the present moment. And that second arc is insight and wisdom. So wisdom is already within you. It's already within us. And part of our job as humans is to run to the edge and understand what is real, what is true. Because you figure out some stuff when you're really quiet and you listen. And you figure out some stuff when you're on the edge of danger or risk. So those are two forms of mindfulness, sitting mindfully and then being at the edge of danger also will help with mindfulness.
That's great. I love how you have a concrete process for, I mean, I'm assuming it's because you work with so many elite athletes, you have to, guide people through these types of processes and, everything. Is that why you've gathered your thoughts so well? Because to be honest, just listening from the questions I've asked you, you do seem to be very structured in, there's 3 ways here and that. Does that come from your career, or is that just something that you're the way you think?
Yeah, thanks, Jared. I've spent my whole life, adult life, trying to sort out how the mind and body and spirit work together. And the more rugged and hostile environments have a lot to teach. So it came from a source of pain for me, is that when I was a young athlete, there was a significant difference between what I could do in practice versus performance and versus competition. And I just flat out wasn't as good. So I lived it and I struggled with it. And at an early age, I just went on this clip to understand like what happened. And it led me down the formal path of education, which was good. So I get all the benefit from, standing on the shoulders of some of the brightest minds from a scientific framework about researching how the mind works. And then I have a deep affinity for rugged and hostile environments. So that's where in that amphitheater, we have to be precise. We can't be reductionists, right? There's no benefit to be a reductionist to say that this is the truth, or it's this 7 steps, 1, 2, 3, whatever. It's like, but to make it simple, to maintain the wisdom, but at the same time, have it be actionable is the sweet spot that I'm trying to sort out for myself and then to be able to communicate it to others. That being said, I've learned so much from people that are extraordinary doers in risky environments. And so you just cut the fat, when you're in environments where you could be seriously hurt, a loved one could be seriously hurt, or even die. You just cut through some serious shit in those environments.
And so this is we're just getting into things here. I mean, I have a lot of other questions for you, but before we go any further, could you give everyone listening a quick background? I mean, it doesn't have to be super long because I'd really rather focus more time on, really diving deeper into some of these topics I have, but just background and what you're doing now.
Sure. Right now, there's a couple things I'm doing, but most people would recognize my work up with the Seattle Seahawks and spending time in the NFL with that team to, help with the mental part of the game, both from a coach's perspective and some of the athletes. And so I'm spending a lot of time working there. I also appreciate spending time with some of the coolest athletes in the world, Olympians that have that spirit of our national approach to things. And so I get to spend time there. And then every year or 2 years, I work on projects that have high risk and high danger. And some people would recognize the work I did with Red Bull Stratos, and I was fortunate enough to be part of that project. And that's when Felix Baumgartner jumped from 130,000 feet, first person to do that outside of a capsule. Phenomenal learning experience for me to be part of some of the brightest minds in aerospace and great thinkers. And one of my more recent projects was called Heaven Sent, and it was with Luke Aikens, who jumped out of an airplane at 25,000 feet without a parachute into a net that he built with his team that was 16 stories tall. So that was phenomenal, risky. And a current project I'm working on now is with a gal named Leah Ditton, who's going to do a solo row from Japan to San Francisco. And she'll be the first woman to actually do that event. I'm sorry, not event, to do that trek. And when I say solo, I mean solo, like no guide boat, just her, the ocean, her 2 oars, her boat, and, a sat phone, and that's it.
Wow. And what is your role behind the scenes of these, like let's go to Red Bull Stratos or I forgot the man jumping out of the 25,000 foot into a net, which, I've seen on a million people share on Facebook. It's just an incredible feat. What's your role behind these performers? Like, what are you doing to prepare them for such incredible things?
That was with Luke Aikens, called Heaven Sent. It doesn't matter if it's them or like one of the folks I work with now. He's a world-class musician. He sells out 50 nights a year, 1.5 million a night. Like, he's a stud, a flat-out stud, and he's affected the global rhythm of music. It's the same thing. And it's the same as like a Fortune whatever CEO. It's the same thing. There's only 3 things as humans we can train. We can train our body, we can train our craft, and we can train our mind. And people who are exceptional at the body craft thing, they're saying, wait a minute, there's this 3rd thing that I'm pretty good at. Like, I am at the tip of the arrow for my industry. But you know what? I really haven't done formal training of my mind. And I want to do that. And so it's all about like, how do you condition your mind to help pursue your very best in whatever endeavor is most important to you? And if we make that for the rest of us, it could be parenting. It could be hundreds of different things that people want to do. And so what is the role? How to condition and train the mind, how to learn more, how to about oneself so that you can be more sturdy in hostile and rugged and challenging environments. And how do you do that? First, it starts with like this journey of self-discovery really begins with some foundational work. What is your philosophy? What's a clear vision of your future? What are your character strengths and for authenticity? Do you have the right appetite to live with passion and to persevere through difficult times? What is your framework? How do you think about the future? Is it optimistic? Is it pessimistic? How do you speak to yourself? So that's that confidence piece. How do you generate a sense of arousal control to be able to have that right energy level on a regular basis? Like, can you focus in the present moment? Do we need to build that up in some kind of way? And then, do you trust yourself ultimately? And then on the end of that is like, let's figure out the ways to recover in a world-class way. And so it's mental, it's all squarely in the psychological, mental skills, emotion, self-relation, other relation category. And that's how I put food on the table, and that's how I, create vibrance for a way of living. Yeah.
And how do you, I'm sure working with these world-class human beings, let's just call them, because you do work in multiple fields, do you start with some sort of an assessment, whether it's an interview? How do you find where their weak point is? Because I'm sure that they, some of the times, may not be aware of what they're lacking. How do you dig that out of someone?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a dance. And this is where the benefit, like for me, of like classic training in psychology comes in. So I'm licensed as a psychologist with a specialization in sport and performance. And then if there is such a thing, a specialty in high stakes environments, a subspecialty there. But like it's a combination. And I don't know if you've studied this stuff or your audience is interested in the kind of the nerdy stuff around psychology, but it's a mix between Rogerian therapy or Rogerian questioning, as well as a Socratic process of learning. And it begins with an orientation that the answers already lie within another person. So I want to hold high regard for that person and regard for the process. And it's an authentic questioning to try to understand the person, their assets first, then where their liabilities or weaknesses or the chinks in the armor are. And so it's a self-discovery, and it takes time, and there's no one form that will do it. Although there is a form that I'll work from, but that alone is not enough.
Yeah, that's why I'm sure that at your level, everything has to be highly individualized to each person that you're working with. But I was interested in how you would go about digging that out of somebody. Now, I do have one other question for you. I mentioned this before we started recording. So reading the book Tribe of Mentors this morning, Tim Ferriss's new book. You're in the book, which is awesome. A lot of great advice. For anyone out there who's not familiar with the book, Tim basically asks a bunch of questions to really badass human beings, and they give great advice. And like I said, Dr. Gervais, you're in here, but everything is great, but he left me wondering with one question that he asked you, because he only put the short blurb to your answer, but no explanation. And so I have to ask you, because I want a little more explanation after I read it. And he says, he asked you the question, what are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? And you gave the answer, you can do anything you put your mind to. You said it's not 100% accurate. And the person who says that blindly might be a little bit naive about human experiences. But I wanted to just dig a little bit deeper on why you think that is, bad recommendation.
Yeah, good. And was there a period after that? Is that where I left my thought?
So the actual quote is, you can do anything you put your mind to. I think no, that's not accurate, and it reveals the advice giver's naivety about human experiences.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so the question is like, why was that my answer there?
Yeah. So why do you think?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
so
bad advice.
I think. Well, I'd say like a bigger thought first is that advice is just a problem. Like, let's get out of the advice giving business. Like, what is that? I've never lived in another person's shoes. It's freaking hard to understand who a person is, let alone give them advice of what they should do. So advice giving is not the right game, period. There's always asterisks to everything, but advice giving is like a bummer. But the second part, like back to the book quote is, that thought that I can do anything that I put my mind to, I think that leads people to like some really bad places, because it sets up this idea that if I was just a little bit better or smarter or, I don't know, more athletic or more this or more that, mentally strong, whatever. Like if I was just a little bit more, I'd be okay. I could do it. And it's not working out the way I thought it could. I would never want to suggest, like, don't try to push to the edges of your capacity, as we talked about earlier. Like, that's required. But just because you say you're going to be the best in the world at something, or that you want to even have a livelihood at something, let alone be the best or even your best in a particular area, it doesn't mean that you'll be able to do it long enough to pay your bills, which isn't really the end game, but like, to create a way of living that is, I don't know, has some sort of sustenance to it. And so there's all these textures to what I really would like to say in that question. One is it is important to set your mind. Really important. And we call it mindset. Like, you've got to set your mind on some stuff, or the world will just whip you around. Like, Muslim Fitness Magazine, Shape Magazine, GQ, Allure, those magazines and those types of TV shows will just whip you around if you don't set your mind on, first, what you want, and two, more importantly, like how you want to live. So I think that naive statement that just because you want to do it, and if you set your mind to it, it'll work out, that's not right. And I'll tell you, the reason I say that with like some conviction is that I think if I could say this in the most respectful way, that if you knew, Jared, what I knew about the people that didn't make it to the tip of the arrow, and how many kids wash out, and how many adults like are really struggling even at the tip of the arrow, that we wouldn't be pushing our kids the way we push our kids. the dark side of trying to be the best, or even trying to accomplish this idea that we have in our minds, is real. I don't think we're ready to talk about it as a society. We want to celebrate the strong man and strong woman, which it's really good to do. But all the other people that tried to do that thing and it didn't work out, we don't hear from them. We don't want to hear from them. They don't get the airplay. And so what I'm trying to suggest in that short little quote is that it's important to be really thoughtful about where we apply our energy and how we want to live along that path. And I don't know. It's a really complicated thought to me. So I'm sorry if I'm bumbling just a little bit here.
No, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I was just curious because I feel like, very similar. What you're saying is these people at the top end of the spectrum too are like we're seeing now failed Navy SEAL candidates, committing suicide, and people who they are fitter than most human beings, more mentally tough than most human beings, and they had to even be, get there, but they couldn't do one thing. I don't know, maybe drowning themselves that they couldn't get over. And that's leading them to taking their own life. Going to your point is people don't understand for the most part, and you said that people probably aren't ready for the conversation. That's probably true, is just what it can do to someone's psyche, no matter what level you're at, whether you are, just struggling to get out of the bed and face the day-to-day grind, or you're at the ultimate elite level. Everyone's going to have their own struggle. I think that's kind of the path you were talking about.
Yeah, and it's built on this model. It's built on a model that's helped us do extraordinary things, and that model was like our grandparents or great grandparents for some of us that struggled or lived during the Industrial Revolution. And during that time, for the skilled workers, machinery came in and was replacing people. And so the model for the fit, and I mean like not just physically fit, but the fit worker was, I got to do more. And so it built this generational philosophy that we are feeling now, that this generation, what's the generation called? The millennial generation is changing. But the model was, I need to do more to be more.
Right.
And that's broken. It'll work for a little bit of time, but it's time to flip that model on its head. And so the do more to be more, to your point about the operator that didn't make it into SEALs or special operations, whatever, or the cadet that didn't make it in, is that he thought he had to do something to be someone. And when he didn't do the thing, then he was nobody, and he might as well take his life. And that's tragic. I mean, I lost a family member to suicide. And so I say that with all of the sensitivity, emotional feeling around that. And so all of that being said is that it's time to flip that model on its head. And we need to be more authentic, be more grounded, be more present, be more here now, be more connected to Mother Nature, to the spiritual aspect, to ourselves, to other people. Be more, and let the doing flow from there. And I think it's a really powerful time that we're in for people that want to live an extraordinary life, is to flip the model to be more and anchor and invest in that and let the doing flow from there. And it's, there's so much freedom when we get that piece right.
And I think this kind of parallels kind of the discussion is, you mentioned in the beginning, elite athletes not having to, you don't talk about, pushing yourself physically that much, that they are already at that level. They don't need you to go tell them to, push it a little bit harder, in the back squat. It's a lot different game when you're talking to the elite, because they don't have to work on some of the smaller things that, other people might be challenged with. But you did also mention in the beginning that managing stress was a huge part of this environment. Can you talk about, the role of managing stress, whatever that means to you? I'd also like, some clarification on that with elite level. I just have to refer to them as human beings, since you work with people in so many different environments. But managing stress in elite humans.
Okay, so we're getting in the weeds, and I love it. And so there's two types of stress. There's eustress and there's distress. Okay, so stress is really about some sort of change on the system, right? The organism or the environment. So stress is about there's some sort of force or perceived force that is creating change. So, and the two types, eustress is stress that is, eu meaning EU comes from the Latin and Greek of good, so that we perceive it to be good, and then distress, meaning like bad or not favorable, is stress that we don't see as being good. Now, so let's just pause there for a moment. Is that when I said that world-class performers, for the most part, we don't talk about working hard, that they already are. We are working to create environments that challenge just the absolute limits out of them. Like, because they are so hungry, either externally motivated or internally motivated, hopefully more internally than externally, but they are so hungry and so driven for whatever the thing is, that our job is to try to create the right environment to really challenge them on a regular basis. So that means getting other alphas in the environment to bring the best out of them, to really honor the process of competing. And that's not trying to be better than someone else. It's trying to be our very best on a regular basis. And so that is a very stressful environment. To wake up in the morning and to know that you've got an incredibly hard day ahead of you and love it is very, very hard to do on a regular basis. So that, now let's go back to the eustress, distress. That stress-based environment, who determines if something is eustressful or distressful? The person does. The doer does. So if grandma dies, you can perceive that as being distressful or eustressful. Meaning distress would be, oh my God, I didn't have a good enough relationship. I didn't spend enough time with her. I'm riddled with guilt. I don't feel good about how the end stage of life was, or I got in a fight with her before, so you can see it as distressful, or you can see it as eustressful, which is, I had lots of time. I learned an incredible amount from my grandmother, and I'm going to honor A, B, and C in my life moving forward. And I'm grateful for the time we had. So that doesn't mean you don't have sadness. It's just a different way of looking at it. Eustress and distress. Now, the game inside of the game is that we want to see things as often as we can as eustressful, because it doesn't require as much resource. Distress is like a container with water or liquid in it that has lots of holes in that container. Eustress still has holes because stress requires energy, but there's less. And so we don't use as much resource on a regular basis, which means that we can go further on the edge of instability. We can go to the deeper frontier, because we have more available internal resources on a daily basis. And so I hope I answered your question. And it's a little esoteric, I know. It's like a little funky. But the problem is, most people think like, yeah, that's me. Yeah, I see things healthy. I get up every morning and go to my capacity. And I might just kind of tilt my head and say, really? Like, is it that nauseating every day? And, really? And it might be. How do you know? Well, you got to get around other world-class thinkers or doers, that are loving the process of getting better at the most progressive rate possible. And let me put just a little footnote in here, is that, we have this concept called anxiety, where 15% of Americans report being anxious, which means probably 30% of Americans are anxious. And anxiety is the thought that the obsessive, compulsive thought that later is not going to work out. So I need to think about how to solving it at the cost of being in this present moment on a regular basis. So it's a pervasive worry about what could go wrong, or it's not going to work out in the future. And either we feel it or it's up in our head, okay, or both. And so what is anxiety? It's the lack of loving being in the mix right now. When you love being in the mix, you love the process of getting better, you love the exposure of what you're not good at, and because it's information that you can use to get better. When you love the art and essence of competing with yourself alongside of other great competitors, there is no space for anxiety. There's just no space for it. We only get one emotion at a time. That's it. That's all we get at one point in time. It's impossible to be happy and sad at the same moment. It's impossible to be anxious as well as happy, joyful. You don't get two. It's just one. So my thought about this is like running to the edge conceptually sounds wonderful. Loving the stress and seeing the stress as something that is great for you is a very stressful based way of thinking about work. And being in a culture where other people equally love it, or maybe even love it more than you. That's kind of like this really cool thing to try to figure out. And it's hard. It is hard to be around alpha people, alpha competitors. It is hard, period. And so one of the ways to get a competitive advantage, whether we are athletes or executives, is to recover in a world-class way. Because our world right now is moving at such a fast clip, as you know, that the ability to recover in a world-class way is a significant competitive advantage in modern times.
So going back to the stress, I have a question about that, because I know, just short background on me, when 2010, I was training to be a fighter pilot in a very, very competitive environment in the Air Force. And one of the first things that they do is similar to what you just explained. They sit you down during the academic portion, and they bring in a performance psychologist. I don't know what his actual job was, but he comes in and gives an entire lecture on the perception of stress, because you are entering in not necessarily physically, but one of the most stressful environments the military can give you, as far as just academics and tempo and everything, nothing that you've ever been accustomed to. And so that I felt like it was brainwashing in all honesty, to a point where they're like, some stress is good, some stress is bad. But that helped me an unbelievable amount, because all I really needed to be told was all of the stress, some of the stress that you are perceiving is good and some bad. It helped me perceive more things that I was doing on a day-to-day basis that were stressful as building me, making me better. And so I was less, while I was still under the wire, I was less distressed about it, to use your exact term. But how could we help someone else? Because not everyone can just be told that. Is there anything that people can do to perceive stress differently?
Become more aware of the thinking that precedes the stress or happens during the stress. And with greater awareness, greater sensitivity, back to that word, greater sensitivity to how your thoughts are working or what those thoughts are, will help people make some more informed choices, or better habits, if you will, of thinking. So we are stuck in the mud with low awareness. We're just kind of stuck. And I would say invest in that mindfulness practice or writing practice to be able to become more clear about the thoughts that get in your way around difficult things.
All right. I like that. As you can see, I like to go tactical on a lot of these things. Just, I think it's incredibly beneficial for everybody listening.
Yeah, I do too. And, I also think that if we're not careful, and I'm not sensing this from you at all, but if we're not careful, it's like, and I love these conversations with like one little caveat, which is sometimes it feels like, and this is not with you, but sometimes it feels like people want to just kind of grab me by the ankles, turn me upside down, and shake all these tactics out of my head. And it's like, no, that's not it. One tactic is not going to do it. It's this fundamental commitment to get better. And the ways to get better are to be vulnerable at the edge of instability and have incredible systems of feedback from wise people or intelligent people and or yourself on how to get better. And to do that, we've got to know where true north is, right? Like, what are we trying to get better at? What does it look like? That's a vision. And what is the philosophy, the guiding principles in our lives that are holding us accountable to being our best? And then we can train our mind, body, and craft in a whole host of ways. So.
No, and I appreciate that, because I do think when I started this podcast, very inexperienced in having these conversations and interviewing people, that I would try and turn people upside down and get these tactics, but it didn't take long where you kind of basically get with someone like a really high caliber human like yourself and basically get slapped in the face for your lower level thinking. You know, that definitely has happened to me over the course of getting better in this podcast. So yeah, I think that also if all you try to do is get a checklist out of somebody, all you're going to end up with is, say I've done 200 interviews, is a checklist of 200 different things to do at a minimum on a daily basis to get better. And then that's not going to help anyone. It really is those guiding principles like you talk about in philosophy that is way more concrete and better to as the takeaway to get out of these conversations.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a really nice insight, and it's a fun. There are lots of ways to get better in life. There are lots of ways to get fit, right? There are some basic systems to pay attention to, and obviously you got to do hard work, and then obviously if you're going to do hard work, you got to recover. And those are the two like really big boulders there, to make sure they get in the container.
All right, so you ready for the quick-fire questions?
Yeah.
All right, what's the hardest workout you've ever done?
It was a beach-based, what we would call now like a HIIT workout, and it was on soft sand. And I lost my first. So how do I know it was hard? Is because first thing that happens for me is that I get this weird cotton mouth thing, and then the second thing that happens is my hearing starts to get I compensate my hearing, meaning that I can't hear very well and it gets cloudy. And then it's like these are all kind of bang experiences. And then I feel some sort of dizziness and nausea. And so I knew I was overheating. I knew I had redlined a little too far. And I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of the central governor, right? That there is more within us, but our body wants to protect us, so it holds us back. And there's deeper capacities than we can ever imagine. So that becomes dangerous. Just knowing that becomes a dangerous thing because you push into the red zone maybe too often. So I was actually looking at the ocean that I jumped into, or the beach that I was on, and I was like, "Oh Jesus, I got to cool down here." Like it was bad, and so on my way to the ocean to try to just get my body in colder temperature, I threw up twice, and my buddy comes over. He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, like, "Why'd you go this far?" And so I just got my body in some colder water, and that was a hard one.
Yeah, that sounds like a push to the limit for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. In your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
Emotional vulnerability.
If you could have only one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Kettlebell.
All right. The kettlebell is making a resurgence in the guests on this show, at least. It used to be heavily barbell, but we're getting a lot more kettlebell now, and I love that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't, I would say, I'd say that's a good piece of equipment, but the best equipment is like your creative mind. I can go like parkour people are like, they got some cool stuff going on. Use the landscape that you have. And you know what though? That's really hard.
Yeah.
let's say a kettlebell, right? Or TRX or whatever is that like, yeah, most people end up doing the same 4 exercises with that apparatus or 6 exercises. Like you can go and hang from a tree and like if you got a strong tree branch, you could probably get so much done. So like the creative mind is like the core of it all. If there's a piece of equipment, I'd choose a kettlebell.
All right, now the question of the show. What is the best advice you have for becoming a better human? And this is 100% open-ended.
Yeah, listen deeply. Be in the present moment more often. Listen to what's true. Be around wise people. And I remember I said like the advice thing drives me nuts.
Right. I was thinking about that when you said it. I was like,
Yeah. So like this is what has worked for me. And it's a theme that I've seen over and over and over again with people. So like I would just encourage people to explore what's already within. And, and it's advice if I say like, you'll receive great benefit from that. Like, I don't want to say that. I want to say like, I've found great benefit from it, and I've seen lots of people that have benefited from it as well.
All right. I appreciate that. Now, I'm sure that people are going to want to learn more about you and, follow up if they can. So where could people go to learn more about you, your work, and everything else?
Okay. Thank you. So I think in a couple fun ways. One is I fired up a podcast as well, and I'm about 100 episodes in, 100 plus, about 100. And it's called Finding Mastery. And so you can find out on all the players, of course. And then the website for that is findingmastery.net. Where else can you find it? It's Coach Carroll, the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. He and I built a joint venture together where we took his know-how and practices around how to build extraordinary cultures, high-performing cultures, and then my know-how around how to condition and train the mind of people who want to pursue their personal best. And the work that we've done together, we created a joint venture where we've taken that, created a curriculum. We're working with corporations that want to train their workforce in similar ways. And so that's called competetocreate.net, which has been great. And so there's there. And then on social media, Twitter is at Michael Gervais. Instagram is at Finding Mastery. And LinkedIn, I think it's my name, but I'm not quite sure what the actual handle is. But if you put my name, Michael Gervais, on LinkedIn, and I publish on all three of those platforms on a regular basis.
All right, I appreciate that. And for anyone listening, go check out all of those things. I will, of course, link to every single one that he just mentioned in the podcast show notes. Dr. Gervais, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for your time today.
Hey, Jared, real quick, of course, thank you for your time. And the second piece is you conducted this conversation with great sensitivity. So you know how much I appreciate that. So I appreciate this conversation a lot. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.